What if everything you thought you knew about medieval society was wrong? What if the most powerful forces shaping the economies of those ancient times from the 5th to the 15th centuries were not always the knights, the kings, or the merchants? What if the true silent architects of wealth, stability, and survival were often overlooked? Number 1. Economic anchors, property, and dowry keepers. The very foundations of wealth in medieval Europe, land and the ability to secure advantageous marriages, often rested in the hands of the elderly. They were the long-term custodians of family estates, agricultural holdings, and the vital dowries that propelled younger generations into stable unions. This role was not just symbolic. It was an active economic guardianship that ensured the continuity and growth of family wealth through generations. A young couple could not simply strike out on their own with nothing. They needed land, a home, and often an inheritance or a dowry. These elements typically came under the watchful eye of an elder. Consider the family of Alara living in the village of Witheridge in Wessex during the 10th century. Alara, having seen 70 winters, was the matriarch of a sprawling family line. Her husband, Adric, had passed years ago, but their land, a collection of arable fields, a small woodlot, and a pasture, remained firmly in her name, while her sons, Aelfric and Bjorn, tilled the soil. The ultimate decision-making power regarding the land, its sale, its division, or its gifting, rested with Alara. According to the customary law of Witheridge, recorded in the local 100 Roll entries from around 985 AD, a widow often retained her dower land for life, even if her sons were the active farmers. This ensured her personal security and gave her significant leverage within the family unit. When Bjorn wished to marry Gaitha from a neighboring hamlet, the question of his future holdings was paramount. Alara, after much deliberation and consultation with the village elders, decided to grant Bjorn a specific portion of the smaller pasture as his own, a direct economic transfer from the elder generation to the younger, enabling the new household to form. This act was not an exception. It was a common practice observed across Anglo-Saxon charters and village customs, such as those found in a Liber Eliensis chronicling the estates of Ely Abbey in the 12th century, where older family members were the primary holders of property rights and the determiners of their transfer. The management of dowries was another crucial economic function. A dowry or dose, in Roman law traditions that influenced much of Europe, was property or money brought by a bride to her husband on their marriage. It was a vital part of the economic contract of marriage, often securing the wife's economic standing and her children's future. It was not uncommon for the elder members of a bride's family, especially her parents or grandparents, to be the ones who meticulously assembled and managed this dowry. They had accumulated resources over decades, understood the true value of goods, and possessed the social standing to negotiate effectively. Take the case of Isolde in Brittany, circa 1250. Her grandmother Morwen, a woman of 80, had been carefully saving choice linens, a small herd of goats, and a modest sum of silver pennies for Isolde's marriage. Morwen recalled the lean years and the importance of a well-stocked dowry to ensure a good match. When negotiations began with the family of Ronan, the young carpenter, Morwen was the lead voice for Isolde. Her reputation for fairness, coupled with her deep knowledge of local market values and agricultural yields, meant that the dowry she presented was both substantial and recognized as such. The marriage contract noted in the parish registers of Saint-Guénot specifically mentioned the components of Isolde's dowry and implicitly acknowledged Morwen's role in its accumulation and presentation. This careful curation of resources by elders was not just a family matter. It directly impacted the wealth and social standing of the new couple, enabling them to establish their own economic unit. Historians analyzing the cartularies of medieval French noble families often point to the critical role of matriarchs in managing family wealth and dowries, demonstrating their central economic power. The elderly also played a role in holding property until the opportune moment for transfer. In many agricultural communities, land was precious. An elder patriarch or matriarch might hold on to the ancestral farm even as their adult children matured, ensuring its integrity and preventing premature division. This was a form of wealth preservation. Consider the practice of seniority succession common in parts of medieval Germany, where the eldest living male, regardless of age, might inherit the family land, holding it for the collective benefit of the extended family until his death. This meant that a man in his 60s or 70s could be the primary landholder, making decisions that affected 3 generations. Records from the Rhineland, such as the Weistummer, customary law collections, prescribe how decisions about crop rotation, fallow periods, or the sale of timber from the common wood were often deferred to the most senior household head, and control over productive assets. Furthermore, elderly individuals who had no direct heirs, or whose heirs had predeceased them, often bequeathed their property to the church, to local charities, or to other family members. These legacies, often substantial, contributed directly to the economic life of medieval communities. A wealthy merchant, having retired in his later years, might dedicate his accumulated fortune to the construction of a new bridge, the endowment of a local hospital, or the funding of a guild hall. These acts of generosity, while motivated by piety or civic pride, were direct economic infusions into the local economy, creating jobs, providing infrastructure, and supporting the poor. The wills recorded in London's Hustings Court Rolls from the 14th century provide numerous examples of elderly citizens leaving substantial bequests that directly shaped the city's economic and social landscape, from funding almshouses to supporting specific trades. The wealth they had accumulated over a lifetime and consciously managed in their later years continued to serve an economic purpose long after their passing, a testament to their enduring financial stewardship. The maintenance of livestock, crucial for both labor and food, also saw the elderly playing a custodial role. A retired farmer might no longer be able to plow the fields, but he or she could oversee the grazing of sheep, mend fences, or supervise the milking of cows. Activities that kept the farm productive and preserved the family's assets. In Icelandic sagas, like the Eyrbyggja saga, elderly characters are often depicted managing household resources and overseeing the care of livestock, even if the heaviest labor falls to the younger generation. This demonstrates a deep-seated respect for their sustained knowledge and ability to manage valuable assets, which were the very lifeblood of the medieval household economy. The older generation understood the cycles of animal husbandry, the signs of illness, and the best times for breeding or sale. Their knowledge, combined with their physical presence, acted as a safeguard for the family's animal wealth, preventing loss and ensuring continued productivity. Without this careful oversight, a family's primary source of wealth and sustenance could dwindle rapidly. Elders also provided critical financial support to younger family members in times of need, often drawing upon their accumulated savings or access to credit built over a lifetime. If a young farmer faced a sudden crop failure, or a craftsman needed to buy expensive raw materials, it was often the elder in the family who could provide a small loan, endorse a debt, or even liquidate a minor asset to help. This was a private form of social welfare and economic insurance. Medieval account books from noble estates and urban merchant families, such as those kept by the Tatini family of Prato in the 14th century, occasionally reveal entries of financial transfers between older and younger family members, indicating the flow of capital and support. This intergenerational financial assistance prevented many young households from collapsing, ensuring the continuation of their economic endeavors and contributing to overall stability in the community. The careful, long-term saving habits of the elderly, often necessitated by previous periods of scarcity, meant they were often the only ones with a buffer against economic shocks. The very physical structures of the family home and farm, the buildings, tools, and stored goods were also under the long-term stewardship of the elderly. They knew where everything was stored, how to repair specific tools, and the best methods for preserving foodstuffs. This intimate knowledge and active maintenance meant that the productive capacity of the household was sustained. An elderly matriarch might oversee the mending of clothing, the repair of household implements, or the preservation of dried meats and cheeses, all of which directly contributed to the family's economic self-sufficiency. A treatise on household management from the 14th century. The Ménagère de Paris, while written for a young wife, implicitly assumes the presence of experienced household managers who would pass down such practical skills, often the older women of the house. Their diligence in these tasks reduced waste and prolonged the lifespan of valuable assets, a direct economic benefit in an age where goods were hard-won and expensive. The elderly did not just hold land and money. They ensured the very physical infrastructure of the household economy remained robust and productive. Number 2, specialized skill preservation. Many professions in the medieval world required years, often decades, of dedicated practice to master. These highly specialized skills were not easily learned or widely distributed. It was often the elderly, those who had devoted their entire lives to a particular craft or field, who possessed this rare expertise. Their continued presence and active participation ensured these vital skills were not lost, providing essential services and crafts that underpinned various aspects of the medieval economy. Without their steady hand and deep knowledge, many critical operations would have faltered. Consider the role of the master mason or architect. Building cathedrals, castles, and complex city walls was a monumental undertaking. Spanning decades, the geometry was intricate, the stone cutting precise, and the structural engineering, while intuitive, required profound experience. A young mason might learn the basics, but it was the gray-haired master, often in his 60s or 70s, who had seen countless foundations laid, arches sprung, and vaults completed, who held the true wisdom. These elders understood how different types of stone would weather where a wall might fail, or how to compensate for subtle ground shifts. Their experience was literally built into the very structures that defined medieval life. The records of Canterbury Cathedral's construction, for instance, mention the longevity of master masons like William of Sens and William the Englishman, suggesting careers spanning decades, where their accumulated knowledge was. Guild regulations across Europe, such as those of the London Masons' Company from the 15th century, often stipulated long apprenticeships and even longer to become a master, naturally favoring older individuals in positions of ultimate authority and skill. The intricate carvings, the soaring heights, the perfectly balanced buttresses, these were the products of seasoned hands and minds. Beyond grand architecture, healing was another area where age and experience were paramount. While medical knowledge was rudimentary by modern standards, practical experience in recognizing symptoms, administering herbal remedies, and performing basic surgical procedures was invaluable. Medieval physicians, particularly those who were not university-trained clerics, but rather practiced healers, often gained their expertise through decades of direct observation and trial and error. The older men and women who served as village healers or bone setters were often the only recourse for illness and injury. Their knowledge of local plants, their understanding of human anatomy gained through informal experience, and their calming presence were crucial. A particularly skilled elder healer might even travel between villages, providing a vital service to a wider economic region. Accounts from monastic infirmaries, such as those found at St. Gall Abbey in the 9th century, reveal a reliance on practical, inherited knowledge passed down through generations, often maintained by the most senior monks. These were not abstract skills. They directly impacted the health and labor capacity of the workforce, preventing prolonged illness and premature death, thus sustaining the agricultural and artisanal economy. Midwifery was almost exclusively the domain of older women. It was a perilous profession, demanding courage, patience, and a deep understanding of the birthing process. A young woman could not simply declare herself a midwife. The role required years of assisting, observing, and learning from experienced practitioners. Elderly midwives had seen countless births, understood complications, and knew how to comfort and guide women through one of life's most dangerous passages. Their steady hands and calm demeanor were critical in ensuring safe deliveries, directly contributing to the survival of mothers and infants, and thus the continuation of the labor force. The absence of a skilled midwife could lead to tragedy, impacting not just individual families, but the demographics and economic potential of entire communities. Legal records from medieval England and France, such as those from the ecclesiastical courts, sometimes mention midwives in their descriptions, often point to women of advanced years, highlighting their long experience and trusted standing in the community. Their role was not just medical. It was social and economic, ensuring the continuity of the family unit, which was the fundamental economic block of medieval society. Scribal work and record-keeping, while often performed by monks, also relied on the consistent, careful hand of experienced individuals. Producing illuminated manuscripts, copying legal documents, or maintaining manorial rolls required not just literacy, which was rare, but also patience, meticulousness, and a steady hand, often cultivated over many years. Older scribes, whose eyesight might be failing, could still dictate or oversee younger copyists, ensuring accuracy and consistency. Their knowledge of Latin, legal precedents, and specific script styles was a specialized skill that underpinned administrative and legal function. Many monastic chronicles and court documents, such as the Domesday Book, were the product of collective efforts over extended periods, with experienced scribes playing a guiding role. The longevity of scribes and their accumulated knowledge meant that continuity was maintained in vital administrative tasks, ensuring land transactions, legal proceedings, and financial accounts were accurately recorded. Specialized crafts too often benefited from the wisdom of elders. A master weaver, having spent a lifetime perfecting her loom and her dyes, possessed unique insights into fiber quality, color mixing, and pattern creation. Her intricate knowledge allowed for the production of higher quality textiles, which commanded better prices in the market and brought greater economic prosperity to her household or guild. Similarly, an elderly blacksmith who understood the properties of different metals and the nuances of forging and tempering could produce superior tools, weapons, and armor. These items were not just practical. They were essential for agriculture, warfare, and everyday life. Guilds, which controlled many of these trades, often had strict hierarchies based on experience, with the oldest and most skilled masters at the top, directing apprentices and journeymen. The statutes of the Goldsmiths Guild of London in the 14th century, for example, reveal that ultimate authority and the most complex work were entrusted to masters who had typically practiced their trade for many decades, safeguarding the reputation and economic viability of the craft. The enduring presence of these skilled elders meant that the quality and innovation within these vital trades were consistently upheld, contributing directly to the economic output and reputation of a town or region. Even seemingly simple agricultural tasks benefited from specialized experience-based knowledge. An elderly farmer, having lived through countless cycles of planting and harvest, would possess a unique understanding of soil types, local weather patterns, and the subtle signs of crop health. They knew which fields were prone to flooding, which areas needed more manure, and the precise moment to plant a particular crop for optimal yield. This empirical knowledge, often passed down orally, was a specialized skill. A younger farmer might follow instructions, but the elder understood the why and could adapt to unusual conditions. Records from manorial estates, such as those found in the surveys of the estates of the Abbey of St. Albans, show a clear reliance on the accumulated agricultural knowledge of the longest-serving tenants, whose advice on crop rotation and land management. This highly localized and deeply experienced knowledge directly impacted agricultural productivity. The bedrock of the medieval economy. Number 3. Wisdom keepers and arbiters. In a world before extensive legal codes, pervasive literacy, or centralized justice systems, disputes were often resolved by those with the most respected authority and wisdom. Their long lives meant they had witnessed countless conflicts, understood local customs and precedents deeply, and commanded the respect necessary to mediate effectively. Their role as unofficial judges and peacekeepers was crucial in maintaining social cohesion, preventing feud from escalating into widespread violence, and allowing economic activity to continue unhindered. Consider the village of Montignac in rural France during the 11th century. Two farmers, Gaston and Thibault, were locked in a bitter dispute over the precise boundary of their adjoining fields. The argument had been simmering for weeks, threatening to spill over into violence which would disrupt planting and harvest for both families. Neither the local lord nor the distant royal court had immediate means to intervene. It was old Jacques, a man in his late 70s, who had lived in Montignac his entire life, who was approached. Jacques remembered the stories passed down from his grandfather about the original survey of the land. He knew the natural landmarks, and he had seen how the boundaries had been respected for generations. He called both men to his humble cottage, listened patiently to their grievances, and then, drawing on his immense knowledge of local history and unwritten customary law, he proposed a compromise. His judgment was accepted, not because he had any formal legal authority, but because of his unquestioned wisdom and the respect he commanded from everyone in the village. This was a common scenario. Village coutumes, or customary laws, often unwritten, were preserved and interpreted by the oldest members of the community. Records from the costumiers of Normandy, for example, sometimes cite the memory of men as a source of legal precedent, effectively referring to the collective memory and wisdom of the elders. Family feuds were another area where elders stepped in. The medieval family was an economic unit, and internal strife could be catastrophic. If brothers quarreled over an inheritance, or sisters over a dowry, the elder patriarch or matriarch of the family would often intervene. Their authority stemmed not just from age, but from their role as the head of the economic household, the one who held the purse strings or controlled the land. Their decision, informed by decades of navigating family dynamics and understanding individual personalities, was often final. In noble families, chroniclers like Matthew Paris in his Chronica Majora sometimes described elderly abbots or abbesses, or even retired nobles being called upon to settle disputes between powerful families, leavening their long-standing relationships and reputations for impartiality. Their intervention could prevent costly and bloody conflicts that would otherwise destabilize regional economies and trade routes. Disputes within guilds were also commonly resolved by the oldest and most respected masters. If a journeyman felt he was unfairly treated, or if two masters disagreed on a contract or a production standard, the matter would often be brought before a council of elders within the guild. These men, having spent their entire lives immersed in the trade, understood the nuances of craftsmanship, the intricacies of market forces, and the unwritten rules of their profession. Their judgments were vital for maintaining the integrity of the guild and ensuring fair economic practices. The statutes of the various craft guilds of medieval Cologne, for example, often stipulated that disputes be brought before the oldest and wisest masters, whose decisions were binding. This prevented internal squabbles from damaging the guild's reputation or its economic output. Even conflicts that arose between communities or between a community and its lord might see the intervention of elders. When a lord imposed a new tax or a levy, or when two villages disputed access to a common pasture, the delegation sent to negotiate with the lord would often include the oldest and most articulate members of the community. Their experience in negotiation, Their knowledge of historical agreements and their dignified presence often lent weight to their arguments. The Dialogistus Cacario, a 12th century treatise on English governmental practice, mentions the reliance on local knowledge and memory for administrative purposes, implicitly pointing to the role of older individuals who held this institutional memory. By acting as knowledgeable advocates and wise negotiators, elders helped prevent full-blown rebellions or debilitating legal battles which would have had severe economic consequences for all parties involved. The role of elders as moral compasses also contributed to economic stability. Their presence and pronouncements on what was right and wrong, fair or unfair, helped to enforce community norms. If a merchant was known to be cheating his customers, or a farmer to be encroaching on common land, the quiet disapproval or direct admonishment from a respected elder could be more effective than any formal punishment. This informal system of justice and moral regulation fostered trust within the community, which is essential for economic transactions. When people trust each other, trade flows more smoothly, debts are honored and agreements are kept. Accounts from rural village studies often highlight the power of community opinion, heavily influenced by its most senior members. In shaping behavior and maintaining order, the economic benefits of such a system are clear. Less fraud, fewer broken contracts, and a more predictable environment for trade and production. Elders also served as living archives of past agreements and historical land use. In an era where written records might be scarce, damaged, or inaccessible, the memory of an elder who had seen generations come and go was invaluable. They could testify to who owned what land decades ago, which rights were granted by which lord, and what traditional obligations applied to certain tenants. This oral history was a legal and economic resource. When a property dispute arose or when a new generation needed to understand their rights and duties, the old ones were consulted. Their testimony of memory was often given great weight in local courts and manorial proceedings. The Rotuli Hunderdorum, English judicial inquiries from the late 13th century, frequently record sworn testimonies of elderly villagers regarding land ownership and customary rights, demonstrating their accepted role as factual arbiters in economic disputes. Their long lives allowed them to bridge generations, providing critical continuity and preventing the economic chaos that could arise from forgotten or disputed claims. Number 4. Masters of resourcefulness and frugality. Survival in the medieval world often hinged on clever resource management and a deep-seated frugality. Good harvests were not guaranteed, and sudden disasters like famine or plague could strike at any time. It was the elderly, having lived through multiple cycles of plenty and scarcity, who possessed an unparalleled understanding of how to stretch resources, prevent waste, and prepare for hard times. Their lifetime of experience made them invaluable teachers and practitioners of economic resilience. Consider the annual cycle of grain. While younger hands toiled in the fields, it was often the elderly matriarch or patriarch who oversaw the careful storage of grain after harvest. They knew the signs of spoilage, the best methods for drying and pest control, and precisely how much grain was needed to feed the family until the next harvest. They also understood the importance of setting aside seed grain for the following year, even if it meant tighter rations in the present. This foresight was critical. One wrong decision could mean starvation. An elderly farmer, let's call him Old Finn, from a remote Scandinavian village in the 9th century, remembered the great famine of his youth. He ensured his family always kept a reserve of dried fish and cured meat, even when the immediate larder seemed full. He taught his grandchildren the precise way to salt fish, to prevent spoilage, and how to store root vegetables in cold, dark cellars. These practices, ingrained from years of harsh lessons, ensured the family's survival through lean winters or unexpected crop failures. Archaeological findings from medieval farmsteads often reveal extensive storage pits and evidence of sophisticated preservation techniques, testaments to the long-term planning and knowledge likely passed down by elders. Beyond food, the elderly were masters of making things last. Clothing was precious. Instead of discarding worn garments, An elderly grandmother would meticulously mend and patch, repurposing scraps and transforming old clothes into rags, then into insulation, ensuring nothing went to waste. A worn tunic might become patches for a cloak, then eventually stuffing for a cushion. This continuous recycling and repurposing was a direct economic benefit, reducing the need to purchase new materials. The Regula Benedicti, the rule for monastic life, emphasized frugality and the careful stewardship of resources. And while monastic, it reflected broader societal values. An elderly monk, having lived a life of austerity, would oversee the repair of tools, the binding of books, or the careful management of the monastery's supplies, embodying the virtue of resourcefulness that was economically beneficial. A broken plowshare, a cracked wooden bucket, or a dull axe might be discarded by someone less experienced. But an elder, having lived through times when such items were nearly impossible to replace, would often know how to repair them, or who in the village possessed a specific skill to do so. They understood the value of every item and the effort it took to acquire it. An elderly blacksmith, having retired from heavy labor, might still be found at his forge, meticulously repairing old tools, sharpening blades, and ensuring they remained useful. This extended the life of capital goods, reducing the need for new investment and preserving the productive capacity of the household or workshop. Records of medieval manorial accounts sometimes show entries for repairs rather than outright purchases, indicating a preference for mending, a practice undoubtedly championed by the more experienced members of the community. Water management was another area where elderly wisdom was paramount. They knew the reliable springs, the patterns of the river, and the best places to dig wells. During droughts, their memory of past dry spells and the strategies used to cope with them, such as rationing water or moving livestock to different pastures, could save a community from disaster. This accumulated environmental knowledge was a form of economic insurance. A village in Aragon during the 13th century, facing a severe drought, turned to the oldest inhabitants who remembered how their grandparents had dealt with a similar event decades ago. Their advice to dig temporary shallow wells in specific dry riverbeds and to rotate the remaining livestock to the highest ground with residual moisture helped the village mitigate frost. Fuel, whether wood or peat, was another resource carefully managed by elders. They knew which trees burned best, where to find fallen timber, and how to stack and dry wood efficiently to maximize its heating potential. Their experience meant less waste and more efficient use of a vital commodity. Old women, often tasked with gathering firewood, were experts at identifying the best sources and making every bundle count, ensuring warmth and the ability to cook, both essential for survival. And indirectly, the careful management of common resources, such as woodlands, was often guided by the memory of the elders, who knew the boundaries and the traditional rights of collection. The elderly also played a crucial role in managing livestock, especially during times of scarcity. They would know which animals were too old to keep, which should be culled for meat, and which were most likely to survive the winter. Their experience with animal husbandry, accumulated over decades, meant they could make difficult but economically sound decisions that preserved the core herd or flock. This preventative management prevented widespread losses and ensured the long-term viability of the family's animal wealth, a cornerstone. Farmers' almanacs and agricultural treatises, while not direct records of elderly action, illustrate the detailed knowledge required for successful livestock management, knowledge typically gained over a lifetime. Even seemingly mundane activities like preserving knowledge of wild edible plants or alternative food sources during lean times were often the domain of elders. They remembered the foraging grounds, the plants that could sustain a family when crops failed, or the fungi that could be dangerous. This knowledge passed down orally was a crucial safety net. When a famine hit a remote region, those who had access to this ancestral knowledge, typically held by the oldest members of the community, had a much better chance of survival, demonstrating the direct economic benefit of their accumulated wisdom in preventing absolute destitution. Medieval herbal texts and household manuals sometimes allude to this practical knowledge, often emphasizing the importance of long experience in identifying and utilizing natural resources. Number 5. Custodians of lore and law. The medieval world was not one of readily available books, universal literacy, or codified laws widely accessible to everyone. Knowledge, history, and the intricate rules of community life were often carried in the minds of its oldest members. These elders were living encyclopedias of agricultural knowledge, local customs, unwritten laws, family histories, and trade secrets. Their memory and wisdom prevented the loss of critical information that underpinned every aspect of medieval economic life. Consider the rhythms of agriculture, the absolute bedrock of the medieval economy. A young farmer might learn from his father, but it was often the elderly, those who had seen countless cycles of planting and harvest, who held the deep, empirical knowledge of the land. They knew the precise date to sow certain seeds in that specific valley, the subtle signs of impending weather shifts which fields needed more manure, and the historical patterns of rainfall and drought. They understood how soil types varied across their holdings, the best time to prune fruit trees, or how to identify plant diseases. This wasn't just general knowledge, it was hyper-local, passed down through generations. Old Gudrun, a farmer in Viking Age, Denmark, remembered the exceptionally dry summer of her grandmother's youth and the specific, ancient ways her family had preserved water for their livestock, a prafer. The sagas, like the Egil saga, often portray elders as figures of agricultural wisdom, their advice sought in matters of farm management. This deep-seated experiential knowledge was a priceless commodity, directly impacting crop yields and animal health, the very foundation of wealth. Beyond the farm trade, secrets and craft techniques were often held by the most senior practitioners. Guilds protected their knowledge jealously, and much of it was transmitted orally through long apprenticeships. An elderly master weaver would know the precise dyes that yielded the richest colors, the secret to the perfect warp tension, or the most efficient method for operating a complex loom. This accumulated expertise allowed for the production of high-quality goods that commanded better prices and maintained the economic reputation of a town or region. In Florence during the 14th century, the Arte della Lana, the wool guild, had elderly master dyers who possessed unique formulas for specific hues. These formulas, often kept secret from outsiders, were passed down only to trusted apprentices, ensuring the guild's economic advantage. The Statuti dell'Arte della Lana implicitly acknowledged the importance of long-term experience in preserving these valuable trade secrets which were crucial to Florence's textile industry. The elderly were also the primary custodians of customary law. Before universal written legal codes, much of law was based on tradition, precedent, and local custom. Who had the right to graze their sheep on common land? What were the rules for inheriting property if there was no will? What constituted a fair price for a bushel of grain in a particular market? The answers often resided in the collective memory of the elders. They had witnessed generations of disputes and resolutions, and their memory provided the case law for their communities. In English manorial courts, the jury of villagers, often including the oldest residents, would often attest to ancient customs and practices regarding land tenure or feudal obligations. Legal documents like the Domesday Book, while compiled by royal authority, often relied on the sworn testimonies of local elders to establish historical land rights and customs. Their ability to recall these precedents prevented endless litigation and provided a framework for stable economic interactions. Without these living repositories of legal lore, economic transactions would have been far more chaotic and insecure. Family histories, too, were vital. In an age of arranged marriages and alliances, knowing the lineage, reputation, and economic standing of potential spouses, elders with their long memories could recall who was related to whom, which families had suffered misfortunes, and which had grown in wealth. This genealogical knowledge allowed for the careful negotiation of marriage contracts and dowries, which were fundamental economic and social transactions. A medieval grandmother could recount generations of marriages, births, and deaths, providing a roadmap for future family strategies. This oral history, sometimes preserved in family sagas or local chronicles, was an informal but powerful form of social and economic intelligence, directly influencing wealth transfer and the formation of new economic units. The saga of Grettir, the Strand from Iceland, for example, is replete with genealogical detail that shapes the characters' actions and economic relationships. Consider the importance of remembering lineage. The knowledge of local geography and resources was also heavily reliant on the elderly. They knew the best fishing spots, the locations of hidden quarries, the safest routes through forests, and the sources of medicinal herbs. This geographical lore was a critical economic asset, especially in rural and resource-dependent communities. An elder might remember a forgotten iron ore deposit, or a reliable source of clay for pottery, unlocking new economic opportunities for their village. Travelers' accounts and local folklore often described how old women and men possessed specialized knowledge that could lead to new avenues of trade or resource extraction. Finally, the oral traditions of epic poems, songs, and stories, often passed down by elders, also had an economic role. They preserved cultural identity and social cohesion, which are indirect but vital elements of economic stability. A community that shares a common history and sense of identity is more likely to cooperate economically, share resources, and maintain order. The elderly storytellers who recounted the heroic deeds of ancestors or the founding myths of their town reinforced these bonds. While not a direct economic contribution, a stable and cohesive society is a more productive and prosperous one. The preservation of such lore is seen in the continuation of bardic traditions in Celtic societies. Took the enduring cultural and by extension economic value of the wisdom held by the aged. Number 6. The original childcare network. In the medieval world, life was physically demanding, and labor was the primary engine of the economy. Every able-bodied adult was expected to contribute to the household's sustenance and prosperity. This presented a significant challenge. Who would care for the children, especially the infants and toddlers, while parents were out toiling in the fields, working in the workshop, or selling goods at the market? The unsung heroes of this dilemma were often the elderly. They formed the original, ubiquitous childcare network, freeing up younger adults to engage in the intensive labor that drove the medieval economy. Consider a farming family in a small village in Bavaria during the 13th century. Young Thomas, in his mid-20s, and his wife, Agnes, spent most of their daylight hours in the fields, plowing, sowing, weeding, or harvesting. Their 4-year-old son, little Heinrich, and his infant sister, Ilara, needed constant supervision. Who watched them? Often it was Thomas's mother, old Frau Hildegard. She was past the age of heavy field work, her back no longer able to endure hours of bending over furrows. But her hands were steady, her eyes still sharp, and her patience vast. While Thomas and Agnes were sweating under the summer sun, Hildegard would be in the modest family cottage, spinning wool, mending clothes, and simultaneously keeping an eye on Heinrich, ensuring he didn't wander too close to the fire or the well, and gently rocking Ilara to sleep in her cradle. This arrangement was not unique to Bavaria. It was a common practice observed across Europe. Ethnographic studies of historical agricultural societies, while not purely medieval, highlight the prevalent role of grandmothers in childcare, allowing younger women to participate fully in economically productive activities out to home. Without Hildegard's presence, Agnes would have been forced to stay home, reducing the family's agricultural output and significantly impacting their economic survival. In urban centers, the scenario was similar. Take the family of Master Gerard, a successful cloth merchant in Ghent during the 14th century. Master Gerard spent his days negotiating deals in the bustling marketplace and managing his workshop. His wife Marie was equally vital to the business, overseeing the dyeing process, managing accounts, and dealing with clients. Their 3 young children were cared for by Marie's aging aunt. Isabel, though no longer agile enough for the rigors of the marketplace, possessed a sharp mind and a calm demeanor. She taught the children, simple sums, basic weaving patterns, and kept them occupied with stories and games, allowing Marie to dedicate her full attention to the complex demands of the cloth trade. This allowed the merchant family to maximize their economic output. Guild records and urban household inventories occasionally allude to the presence of elderly family members, implicitly suggesting their role in domestic management and childcare, freeing up the primary earners. Without Isabel, Master Gerard would likely have had to hire external help, an additional cost, or Marie's participation in the business would have been curtailed. Reducing their profits, this childcare function extended beyond simple supervision. Elders also provided essential early education and socialization. They taught children valuable skills that would later become their economic backbone. A grandmother might teach a young girl how to spin thread, knead dough, or identify edible wild plants. An elderly grandfather might teach a young boy how to whittle wood, tie knots, or care for small animals. These were not mere pastimes. They were foundational skills for future farmers, craftsmen, and homemakers. The Book of the Knight of La Tour Landry, a 14th century French text on the education of young women, frequently emphasizes the role of elder female relatives in imparting practical and moral and preparing the next generation for their economic and social roles. By providing this early and formal education, the elderly were investing directly in the human capital of the future workforce. Furthermore, the elderly provided a vital emotional and psychological safety net for children. In an era of high infant mortality and frequent parental absence due to labor, the consistent presence of a loving elder provided stability. This emotional support, while not directly measurable in economic terms, contributed to the well-being of the children, making them more resilient and capable adults, less prone to illness or social instability, which in turn fostered a more productive future workforce. The security provided by an elder's presence allowed parents to focus on their demanding tasks, knowing their children were safe and nurtured. Chroniclers like Orderic Vitalis in his Ecclesiastical History often detail the importance of family networks, implicitly including the support of older members. The elderly also acted as a buffer during crises. If a parent fell ill or a sudden demand for labor arose requiring both parents to be in the fields for an extended period, the elder was there to take over the care of the children. This flexibility was crucial in preventing economic disruption. If a mother contracted the plague and no elder was present, the children might be left vulnerable, or the father would have to abandon his work, leading to immediate economic hardship. The presence of an elder minimized these shocks, ensuring the continuity of the household's productive capacity. Records from medieval plague outbreaks, while often grim, sometimes reveal how extended family networks, including elderly relatives, stepped in to care for orphaned or sick children, preventing complete societal collapse. The contribution of elders to childcare was often unseen in official records. No one wrote down, "Grandma watched the kids today," but their presence is implied in the very structure of medieval households and the intense labor demands placed upon adults. The existence of multi-generational households, a common feature of medieval society documented in archaeological digs of peasant dwellings and urban housing, strongly suggests the presence of elderly family members who could assist with domestic tasks and childcare. Without this silent, tireless network of grandmothers, grandfathers, and other older relatives, the younger generation would have been severely constrained in their ability to participate in the arduous but essential economic activities that sustained medieval life. They were the invisible foundation upon which the entire labor force rested, enabling the agricultural, artisanal, and commercial engines of the era to turn